Fortnite in VR sounds exciting, but if it actually happens, it won't just be another VR game. It could force the entire industry to change overnight. Here's what that really means. What if tomorrow, Epic Games dropped a single announcement that would change gaming forever? What if that announcement was just 2 words: Fortnite VR? This isn't just a fantasy, it's a potential turning point for the entire entertainment industry. Let's break down why. Fortnite isn't just a game, it's a global phenomenon, a social platform, and a glimpse into the metaverse. It has a massive, dedicated audience that spans every demographic. It hosts live concerts with millions of virtual attendees and constantly evolves with new content. No other game has this level of cultural penetration. Most VR games are amazing experiences, but they preach to the choir, the existing VR community. Fortnite would bring the masses. It would instantly convert millions of flat-screen players into potential VR customers. Think about it. A live Travis Scott concert, but you're actually there. A massive, world-ending event, but you're looking up at the sky in total immersion. Fortnite is already a metaverse. VR would just be its final, most immersive form. That's why it's the perfect candidate to take VR from a niche hobby to a mainstream reality. But let's be realistic. Dropping the current version of Fortnite into a VR headset would be a disaster. The sheer chaos would be unbearable. Imagine being in the middle of a build battle, with walls and ramps appearing all around you at lightning speed. Now imagine that in 360 degrees. Players would be spinning, looking up, down, and all around, trying to track opponents while simultaneously building structures. This is a recipe for extreme motion sickness and cognitive overload. The human brain simply isn't wired to process that much high-speed spatial information. The flashing lights, the explosions, the constant movement. It would be an overstimulating nightmare for many. Even veteran VR players might find it too intense. The very things that make Fortnite so exciting on a flat screen, its speed and verticality, become its biggest obstacles in virtual reality. For Fortnite VR to work, it can't just be a port. It needs a fundamental redesign. So, how would Epic Games pull it off? They would have to completely rethink the core mechanics. Building, for instance, couldn't rely on lightning-fast keyboard inputs. It would need to be a more deliberate, physical action. Imagine grabbing virtual panels and snapping them into place with your hands. It would be slower, yes, but incredibly intuitive and satisfying. Combat would also need a rework. The current Bloom system for weapon accuracy would not feel right when you're aiming down a physical sight. They'd likely move to a system based on realistic aiming, rewarding steady hands. And the movement speed would almost certainly have to be reduced. No more frantic sprinting and bunny hopping. The pace would need to be slowed down to prevent motion sickness and make the experience more tactical and less twitch-based. It would feel like a different game, but one built from the ground up for the unique strengths of VR. If Epic Games gets this right, the business impact would be seismic. We're talking about a mass adoption trigger for VR. Right now, many people see VR as a cool but expensive novelty. But if their favorite game, the game their friends are all playing, suddenly offered a revolutionary VR mode, millions would rush out to buy a headset. This surge in demand would be a gold rush for hardware manufacturers like Meta, Sony, and others. Headset prices might even drop as production scales up. Suddenly, a VR headset becomes the must-have accessory, just like a new console. And when the money flows, the big developers follow. A2A studios that have been hesitant to invest in VR would see the proven market and dive in head first. Fortnite VR wouldn't just be a successful game, it would create the entire ecosystem needed for VR to finally go mainstream. The launch of Fortnite VR would set off a chain reaction across the industry, a domino effect that no one could ignore. Think about it. Once Fortnite proves that a massive live service battle royale can thrive in VR, what happens next? Activision would be under immense pressure to create a Call of Duty VR experience. EA would look at Apex Legends and see a massive missed opportunity if they don't follow suit. And Rockstar Games, seeing tens of millions of players embracing a persistent virtual world, might finally see the business case for a full-blown GTA VR. It forces everyone's hand. No major publisher could afford to be left behind. They would be forced to invest, to innovate, and to build for this new VR-first audience that Fortnite single-handedly created. This one game would drag the entire A2A industry, kicking and screaming into the virtual reality future. In the end, it comes down to a simple truth. Fortnite doesn't follow trends, it creates them. It redefined the Battle Royale genre, popularized the Battle Pass model, and showed the world what a live service game could be. It has a history of making bold moves that reshape the landscape. If Fortnite decides to embrace virtual reality, it won't be a quiet launch. It will be an event. It will be a statement that the future of interactive entertainment is here. It will be the turning point we've all been waiting for. Because if Fortnite goes VR, the rest of the industry will have no choice but to follow. If Fortnite gets a VR support, it won't just be a new feature. It will be a signal. Right now, VR is still treated like an experimental space. Interesting, promising, growing, but not essential. Fortnite is essential. It's one of the few games that doesn't just follow trends, it sets them. Battle passes, live events, cross-platform ecosystems, massive cultural crossovers. When Fortnite moves, the industry pays attention. So if Fortnite enters VR, even partially, perception shifts overnight. But let's break this down honestly. Fortnite is built on chaos, high-speed camera movement, instant building edits, rapid weapon switching, 360-degree awareness at all times. VR doesn't naturally support that level of chaos. VR punishes speed without intention. It amplifies motion. It magnifies visual overload. So Fortnite in VR wouldn't be a port. It would require a redesign. Building might need physical gestures or simplified systems. Combat pacing might slow down. Player counts might be adjusted. Visual clarity would become critical. And here's where it gets interesting. If Epic solves that problem, if they create a version of Fortnite that feels native in VR, that becomes a blueprint. Not just for battle royales, for large-scale multiplayer VR in general. Because the real barrier for VR right now isn't hardware, it's scale. Can VR handle 100 players? Can it handle competitive intensity? Can it handle mass-market accessibility? Fortnite answering yes to those questions would change investment behavior instantly. Studios that were cautious would accelerate. Hardware manufacturers would double down. Investors would shift capital. And suddenly, VR isn't a niche. It's a strategic priority. But there's a risk hidden inside that momentum. To succeed at Fortnite scale, VR would likely need to become safer. Less physically demanding, less experimental, more controlled. Mass adoption always comes with standardization. And when standards lock in, creative risk often shrinks. So the future shaped by Fortnite VR might not be the wild, experimental VR enthusiasts imagine. It might be streamlined, accessible, highly optimized. That's not necessarily bad, but it's different. Fortnite entering VR wouldn't just test whether the game works. It would test what kind of VR future becomes dominant. One built around spectacle and social scale, or one built around deep physical immersion. Because Fortnite doesn't just participate in ecosystems, it reshapes them. If it succeeds, every major publisher has to reconsider their hesitation. If it struggles, it reinforces the narrative that VR can't handle mainstream chaos. That's why Fortnite VR isn't just a feature idea, it's a potential turning point. And whether it happens or not, the fact that we're even asking the question shows something important. VR isn't waiting for better graphics anymore. It's waiting for a defining moment. And Fortnite might be the game capable of creating it. If you want grounded, no-hype analysis about where VR is actually heading, subscribe.